World War II saw some of the most intense, tragic, and pivotal battles in modern history. This conflict redefined global power and left entire cities' economies and generations irrevocably changed. Today, we're counting down the 7 deadliest battles of the war, revealing not just the brutal numbers but also the stories of strategy, resilience, and sacrifice that reshaped the course of history. So stay tuned to find out which battle takes the number 1 spot as the deadliest of them all. Number 7. Normandy Invasion, D-Day. The Normandy Invasion, also known as D-Day, marked the beginning of the Allied campaign to liberate Western Europe from Nazi occupation. On June 6, 1944, in the pre-dawn hours, over 156,000 American, British, and Canadian troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. This was the largest amphibious military operation in history, involving over 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and thousands of vehicles. The invasion force faced a relentless wall of machine gun fire, mines, and artillery as they landed on 5 beaches, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The intense combat on Omaha Beach was especially deadly. Soldiers disembarking from landing crafts faced steep cliffs and well-prepared German defenses that inflicted horrific casualties. Despite the heavy losses and chaotic conditions, the Allies managed to secure a foothold, and over the coming weeks hundreds of thousands more Allied soldiers and vehicles flooded into Normandy. The fighting extended inland, where Allied troops battled fortified German positions in the dense hedgerow-filled terrain. Casualties climbed as soldiers pushed through entrenched lines and engaged in bloody town-by-town and field-by-field combat. By the end of the Normandy campaign, more than 425,000 soldiers, including German Allied and French civilians, had lost their lives. This campaign laid the groundwork for the liberation of France and ultimately the defeat of Nazi Germany in Western Europe. Number 6. Battle of France. The Battle of France was one of the war's earliest and most shocking Allied defeats. In May 1940, Nazi Germany unleashed its blitzkrieg tactics, quickly overpowering French and British defenses. Using rapid tank advances, mechanized infantry, and overwhelming air power, the Germans pushed through Belgium, the Netherlands, and into France at lightning speed. The Allied forces were unprepared for such a swift and coordinated assault, particularly in the Ardennes, a forested region that the French believed was too difficult for tanks to cross. German panzer divisions took advantage of this oversight and broke through French defenses, cutting off and surrounding thousands of Allied troops. As German forces swept through France, thousands of civilians fled, clogging roads and complicating Allied attempts to reorganize. The British Expeditionary Force found itself stranded along the coast, leading to the historic evacuation at Dunkirk, where over 300,000 British and French soldiers were rescued by a makeshift fleet of naval and civilian vessels. However, despite the remarkable evacuation, France fell to the Germans within 6 weeks, with nearly 500,000 soldiers killed or wounded. The rapid fall of France left Europe vulnerable to Nazi domination and marked a bleak chapter for the Allies early in the war. Number 5. Siege of Leningrad. The Siege of Leningrad was one of the longest and most tragic sieges in history, lasting a staggering 872 days. German and Finnish forces surrounded the city of Leningrad, cutting off food and supplies to its 2.5 million inhabitants. From the beginning, Hitler planned to starve Leningrad into submission, intending to destroy one of Russia's cultural heartlands. With no access to food, fuel, and medical supplies, the people of Leningrad faced starvation, brutal winters, and daily bombardments. By the winter of 1941 to 1942, hunger became so extreme that people were forced to eat animals, sawdust, wallpaper paste, and even leather. Thousands died each day, and frozen bodies lined the streets. Despite the unimaginable hardships, the people of Leningrad held on. In the city, residents worked in factories building weapons for the Soviet army and repairing damage from bombings. They dug trenches and erected barricades to defend against potential German assaults. Soviet forces managed to partially break the blockade in January 1943, providing a slim lifeline, but the siege would not end fully until January 1944. By then, over 1 million lives had been lost to starvation, cold, and artillery fire. The siege was a testament to the endurance and spirit of the people of Leningrad, who held their city against incredible odds. Number 4. Battle of Kursk. The Battle of Kursk, located on the Eastern Front in Russia, was the largest tank battle in history and a decisive Soviet victory. After suffering defeat at Stalingrad, Germany sought to regain the upper hand with a massive offensive on the Kursk salient, a Soviet-controlled bulge in the front lines. Germany deployed 3,000 tanks, thousands of aircraft, and nearly 1 million soldiers, hoping to encircle and destroy Soviet forces in one sweeping attack. However, Soviet intelligence intercepted the German plans, allowing the Red Army to construct massive defenses including minefields, anti-tank barriers, and fortified bunkers. When the Germans launched their offensive, they encountered intense resistance. Soviet forces used a scorched earth strategy, retreating and drawing the Germans into prepared traps. On July 12th, the two armies clashed in the village of Prokhorovka, in one of the largest tank battles of the war, where hundreds of tanks collided in close-quarters combat. Ultimately, Soviet reinforcements arrived, forcing the Germans to retreat. The battle resulted in approximately 1 million casualties, with the Soviets regaining control of much of Western Russia. Kursk marked the end of German offensive operations on the Eastern Front and shifted the balance of power decisively in favor of the Soviets. Number 3. Battle of Moscow. The Battle of Moscow was Germany's first major defeat in World War II and a critical victory for the Soviet Union. Hitler had planned to capture the Soviet capital before winter set in, believing that Moscow's fall would break Soviet resistance. In October 1941, German forces advanced, but the harsh Russian winter and fierce Soviet defenses slowed their progress. Soviet reinforcements, including Siberian troops used to freezing temperatures, were brought in to protect the capital. Snowstorms and sub-zero temperatures crippled the German army, whose soldiers and vehicles were not equipped for such conditions. In December, the Soviets launched a counteroffensive, pushing the Germans back nearly 100 miles from Moscow. This defeat shattered Hitler's belief in a quick victory over the Soviet Union and showed the world that Germany could be resisted. The Battle of Moscow claimed close to 1.2 million lives and highlighted the role that both natural and human resilience would play in defending the Soviet Union. Number 2. Battle of Berlin. The Battle of Berlin was the final major battle of World War II in Europe and marked the end of Nazi Germany. Soviet forces had reached the outskirts of Berlin by April 1945, outnumbering the remaining German forces. Hitler's army, now consisting of young boys, elderly men, and the wounded, fought a hopeless defense as the Soviet Red Army pounded the city with artillery. The bombardment turned Berlin into a smoldering ruin, and street-to-street combat ensued as the Soviets pushed toward the city center. Hitler, realizing defeat was inevitable, took his life on April 30th in his bunker. Despite the chaos and loss of leadership, German forces continued to resist until May 2nd, when Berlin finally fell. The battle resulted in around 1.5 million casualties, including countless civilian lives, and left Berlin devastated. The Battle of Berlin was not just a victory for the Soviets, but a symbolic end to Nazi tyranny in Europe. Days later, Germany surrendered unconditionally, marking the end of the war in Europe. And finally, number 1, Battle of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad is often considered the deadliest battle of World War II and a crucial turning point in the war. German forces aimed to capture Stalingrad to secure oil resources in the Caucasus and cut off Soviet transportation on the Volga River. The battle began with an aerial bombardment that reduced Stalingrad to rubble, but the Soviets refused to surrender. Fierce close-quarters combat ensued as both sides battled for control of the city block by block, house by house. Soviet forces used the urban ruins to their advantage, and the Germans, bogged down in prolonged street fighting, suffered severe losses. By November, Soviet forces launched a surprise counteroffensive, Operation Uranus, encircling the German Sixth Army and cutting off their supplies as winter set in. Trapped, starving, and facing constant attacks, the Germans held out until February 1943, when they finally surrendered. The Battle of Stalingrad resulted in around 2 million casualties and crippled Germany's Eastern Army. It marked the beginning of a Soviet push that would eventually lead to Berlin and the fall of Nazi Germany. These battles serve as haunting reminders of the devastation and human cost of World War II. Each was a turning point in its own right, shaping not only the course of the war but also the world that followed. Let us know what you think of our list, and if you found this historical dive informative, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for joining us as we remembered these critical moments in history.